Jesus, God bless these people and their family. Over 40 bodies pulled from the Potomac River after mid-air collision. Hundreds of families going to be impacted by this. Jesus.
An Airlines flight from Kansas just across the river from Washington, D.C. The Associated Press now saying, sadly, that more than 40 bodies have been pulled from the Potomac River. We know that on board the plane were 60 passengers and 4 crew members, and there were 3 soldiers on the Black Hawk helicopter. President Donald Trump and the D.C. fire chief among those who have said that all 67 people aboard both aircraft are presumed dead as recovery efforts do continue there in the Potomac. Again, a lot of information is coming in on this, but still so much left to figure out. I do want to discuss all of this just a little further, so let's bring in Dr. Philip Mann, an assistant professor of organization and management at Harrisburg University. He spent nearly 2 decades in various roles with the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, and also served in the Department of Defense, the U.S. Army, and the National Guard's Aviation Regiment. You have done it all, of course, and we do appreciate you being here to provide some insight on all of this.
What went wrong?
Glad to be here.
All right, so first off, I do want to ask kind of your take here. As you heard all of this start to unfold, the information started to come in that this was a mid-air collision between a passenger jet and an Army Black Hawk helicopter. What are you thinking at this point as you in your head have all of this experience? You have everything that you've kind of seen over the past decades.
Yeah. Anytime I hear of a crash and it's any kind of an accident, my first thought, especially in the commercial space or the military space, is these are amazingly qualified pilots, amazingly qualified air crews. And at an airport like Reagan, it's a super busy and super well qualified air traffic controller. So my first thought is, where did the mistake happen? Where did we lose attention? Where did a procedure break down or something? And that's, I mean, I certainly feel for all the people that are involved or affected by it. But my first thing is kind of jumping ahead to what can we find out and how can we prevent this from ever happening again?
Can you tell me a little bit about the airspace, really just over Reagan National Airport? Because I have to imagine that it is heavily traveled, heavily guarded and watched, because we're talking about just a short distance away from places like the White House, the Capitol, all of those locations.
Right. Yeah. The airspace around Reagan National is kind of unique because it has that all the security limitations and all the flight restrictions over the Capitol, over the critical areas of the White House, and that. And what that does is that creates a situation where an already busy airport forces people to fly in much more restricted and condensed corridors, and then add to that just the density of military operations in the area, both in support of that security, but also just because there are bases and operations going on, within a couple hundred miles. There are lots and lots of them. It creates a situation where the attention people have to have, the detail they have to have, and the precision they have to have flying is much more enhanced than it might be in other similar sorts of airspaces without those additional restrictions.
We know that the NTSB is working this investigation here. So I have to ask, based on your experience, what really is the FAA's role as all of this is looked at so closely?
Well, the FAA's role, and the FAA is going to support the NTSB. The FAA is going to provide a lot of data. They're going to provide whatever they need to evaluate, because the NTSB is going in with the perspective of not trying to find and point fingers at people. They're trying to find out, why did this happen and how can we prevent it from happening again? And this one has a little bit of an additional complication because the Army also has a role. The Army kind of manages its own aviation. So you've got the Army on one hand and the FAA on the other hand. And they're both going to be providing data to the NTSB to support the investigation, and then to try to get and learn what they can to make interim changes or earlier changes before the final report comes out.
What question or questions do you have that you hope maybe will be answered in the coming days, months, and possibly?
One of these, either they both were given permission to have that airspace, because usually they have airspace. Like, think of the airspaces like cut up, like 10,000 feet, 12,000 feet, 18,000 feet. You might have one aircraft at 18,000 feet and another aircraft at 15,000 feet, and they could cross paths and you wouldn't see them. But did they take off at the same time? What was it? who was in somebody was somewhere they wasn't supposed to be, or got permission to be somewhere that they shouldn't have, or somebody was just lost. Either way, they're gonna figure this out.
Years.
One of the kind of outstanding questions I have is are they going to be able to find a place where some of the new and emergent technologies comes in that'll help us resolve some of these issues? This is one of those situations that appears to be, and this is my speculation, it appears to be that there was a miscommunication or a misidentification of an aircraft by the pilot, or the Black Hawk possibly, and that itself is something that might be enhanced by technologies like augmented reality, mixed reality, that maybe could have drawn a circle around the place they were supposed to be looking instead of letting them try to identify it themselves. And I'm also looking to see where...
Oh, he's saying like something that, okay, it's a like sort of a radar around the helicopter, like a force field. Anything within that force field above, like, oh, is an object in front of you 500 feet. Like, oh, so then, because otherwise you're like, it's at night, maybe foggy, and the Black Hawk helicopter, they're literally looking out. Like, you see pilots driving jets and stuff, or flying jets, not driving, flying, or helicopter, they're literally looking, like you look in a car, like your rear view mirrors, and they're literally looking in the airspace, looking for things. They're like, oh, well, it's pinging an object up there, but I don't see nothing. I think we're clear. And maybe that plane is coming up at an angle or something. He just didn't see it, or like, because that's a big-ass plane, right? It had to be the visual conditions. But an AI or a computer wouldn't need that. It'd be like, something's right there. So even if you don't see it, but like, okay, listen, they like RIP Kobe. You think about Kobe and this helicopter hitting a mountain. You're like, damn, that mountain was right there. How did you miss that mountain after everything's said and done? But the conditions were so cloudy and foggy, and they did not see the fucking mountain probably to the last minute, and they tried to go up, and boom, they got hit. It's the same thing. If you can miss a mountain, you can miss a plane.
Where does this affect how we do hiring and training for air traffic controllers? Because this is a lot of talk about this being a short staff facility, but that the idea of air traffic not being staffed fully is a decades long problem that in the case here is actually exacerbated by some of the COVID stuff, because the pipeline is many years long. So when they had to stop hiring or slow down hiring during COVID, well, that slows down and causes us to have less proficient people. And at the other side of that, we have mandatory retirements because of age, and all that kind of thing. And it's a many decades long thing. And regardless of how people get into the system to be hired, they still don't get a position as an air traffic controller unless they're qualified and competent. And it's just a high attrition, high tax, or high turnover sort of thing. Because,
and I hear him saying that. I ain't hear him, but I've been seeing reports of Trump said it's DEI or whatever. But he's kind of throwing back at that. Like, you can get a job at the airport because of DEI, but you're not going to become an air traffic controller because of DEI.
The aviation is very unforgiving. This might have been what in a different context would have been a very simple, very easy to get over fender bender or something like that. But you don't have fender benders in airspace. You have what we have here over very, very relatively small errors have very, very, very large consequences.
You talked a little bit about the Army overall. We know this was a Black Hawk helicopter that was involved. I imagine the training for that overall has to be a lot more involved than flying just maybe your average plane. There's probably a lot of training, right?
They got missile systems.
Yeah, there's a lot of training, and not to say anything, but commercial pilots are trained at a very, very high level for fixed wing. They're just trained differently. Where commercial aviation, you're generally trained for higher level navigation, you're trained for more procedures kind of things. The unique aerodynamics of a helicopter, any helicopter, and especially a high performance helicopter like a Black Hawk, means that there's a lot more focus on learning how to operate at low levels, learning how to navigate, within a few hundred feet of the ground, learning how to deal with just the fact that you can actually stop in midair, hover, you can't hover, and dealing with that.
Black Hawk pilots are fucking good to go. They high speed. Like, they probably didn't even think about it. Like, the pilots in the Black Hawk probably did not even think, like, hey, we're not even high up. It's not that, like, the plane probably was it just taking off or trying to land? Because I doubt if they were both flying in, like, they wouldn't even be flying in the same airspace. This is like 1 millionth of a chance of happening. Like 1 in 1 million. Like, I don't even know. Explain this. The odds of that happening, a Black Hawk hitting a commercial liner, is crazy. You'll have more of like an F-18 or something hitting it, but Black Hawk, it'd have to have been really close to the ground.
And there is going one way or the other. If you go from being a helicopter pilot to an airline pilot, there's a transition of training and upgrading. Going from a commercial pilot or a jet pilot to a helicopter pilot, you would have a similar transition going the other way. It's more focusing on the operating environment and, in addition to the complexity, but they're both fairly comparably complex.
You kind of touched on this already, but do you see this leading to any sort of changes of any kind?
Better technology.
I see this could possibly, and this is again just going off of what the reporting's been so far with the staffing and stuff like that, and just my awareness that fatigue because of staffing and fatigue because of just the nature of the job is a big thing. I can imagine that this will possibly put more emphasis on a recent Federal Aviation Administration program where they call it the Enhanced Collegiate Training Initiative, the Enhanced CTI, which allows a broader pipeline of trainees where students do a lot of their preliminary training at a university, at an approved program that's been overseen by the FAA. Currently, I believe there's only 3 enhanced CTI schools. There's the Embry-Riddle campus in Daytona. There's a University of Oklahoma, and there's a Tulsa school in Tulsa. Name is eluding me right now, but there's like 3 schools that are approved for it. And students who go through there, they go directly to facility training. They don't have to do the narrow pipeline going through Oklahoma City to get trained by the FAA.
He's saying the FAA has been the only one training these people that's in the tower, air traffic controllers. So now you have to basically approve these third-party schools and stuff to train them because everybody can't go through the FAA. It's not big enough. Or they going and they're slowly. So they pumping out fucking 10 controllers a year when we need 30, 40 a year. People taking more flights. There's more things. There's more airlines popping up. It's going. Airports are getting more compacted, not less. People are taking more flights as they get cheaper and better technology, whatever. They're taking more.
And I hope that we realize that the only way to increase the training is to increase the training capacity, and that will get us to having more qualified people, and that will allow us a better lever to be able to mitigate fatigue and mitigate staffing shortages and hopefully buffer whatever the contributing factors were along those areas to this particular crash.
All right. Dr. Philip Mann, thank you so much for taking.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Philip Mann. We definitely going
It is so weird that we have a crash. And people should take that at heart. If people are seeing a crash and they're afraid to fly all of a sudden, they shouldn't be. The fact that this made the news means that it's a very, very rare incident, and they can take that to be a positive indication of the safety, not a negative indication of their.
Now, the impact of that deadly collision is being felt across the country. So far, at least 2 of the people killed.
Committed soldiers I've ever worked with.
Shock and sadness continue in the wake of the mid-air collision near Reagan National Airport. Actions. 28-year-old Sam Lilly was a graduate of Richmond Hill High School near Savannah and Georgia Southern University. Sam's father, Timothy Lilly, says it was the worst day of his life, finding out his son was on board that American Airlines flight.
Last night when I saw on Fox News there was a crash in D.C., I really didn't think there was any way it was my son, but I started to do the research, and I realized that was his schedule to be on that flight. And then, I got with his fiance and confirmed that. And then when it all came crashing down.
Sam started his flight training in 2019 and has been with PSA Airlines, part of the American Airlines group, for 2 years. He was also engaged to be married.
All this it's a bitter pill to swallow.
Well, I said hundreds of families and people will be impacted by this, but you still have a higher chance of probably getting 2 or 3 car crashes in the same day before you get in a crash in the air. Things like this happen. When it happened, though, things change. There's new laws put into place, whatever. Like one terrorist attack, boom. You can't have a bunch of liquids on a plane. Just one thing needs to happen. So hopefully we'll learn from these as human beings so it will not happen again. RIP to these people and their families and the lost people. Let me know, cave dwellers. I hope you stay safe. Have a great weekend. Do your thing. Stay safe.